The information in this broadcast is for professional purposes only and is not intended to include or constitute personal mental health advice. You should obtain independent advice via your psychotherapist, GP, or counsellor should you be seeking therapy for personal matters. For more information, please visit psychwebinars.com.
So this is the 11-year-old brain that I managed to source. So on my left-hand side is a healthy 11-year-old brain, and on the right-hand side is a malnutrited brain. And it's important that we sort of understand that trauma impacts brain development very, very significantly. And actually, what happens is that the brain, as you can see in the left-hand side, it's bigger than the one on the right-hand side, simply because the thick white lining is there is developed through abuse and stress and all that sort of stuff. So a child of abuse actually has a smaller brain size that leads to further significant delays in significant key developments in their life. So when we look at the trauma in children or trauma in adults, trauma in developing brain, what are we saying? It's more than just behaviour. Or are we actually seeing things that we examine the brains of those who have been traumatized? The slide that you see here shows two cross-sectional views of the brain on the MRI. What you see on the left is a normal 11-year-old male, and the brain and the surrounding tissue in the skull, and on the right you see a malnutrited 11-year-old male. What is demonstrated is the physical impact trauma on the brain. So this is a boy who's experienced physical abuse. This is caused not just by physical abuse, but through significant malnutrition and neglect. And a study done by Dr. DeVellis, he studied the brain of children who's abused and compared them to the brains of children who are not abused. Dr. DeVellis found that the brains of children who have been abused were different. If you look again at the left brain, there is a healthy child's brain. You see a thin external layer, so that thick white one you saw on the right-hand side. On the left-hand side, it was really, really thin, if you remember. The white matter, the white area arching over the brain image, and if you look at the image on the right, you see a thicker white band over the brain. This shows atrophy or shrinkage of the brain cortex, the cerebral cortex. Then besides the cortex, the other structures of the hippocampus, which is lower down, is also smaller in size. If you look at the triangles, the black triangles in the brain, they're also called lateral ventricles. Lateral ventricles. On the left-hand side, they are small triangles, pretty uniform. On the right, these are extended triangles, much larger in this MRI image. So what you see here is the impact of trauma causing shrinkage in the brain. As the brain shrinks, the white covering the expanded ventricles enlarge as well. This gives the credence to the fact that trauma and neglect impacts on a person's brain. And the impact is where the function and the form are interconnected. So the function and behaviour follow the form changes. This means changes in behaviour would occur with someone whose brain has noticeably changed. So that's a real, scientific, biological explanation of everything, and that's a little bit out of my league, but I put that information in there because I just want to sort of paint this picture that when we work with children that have been abused or maltreated and they're going through all these really struggles in life, it just goes that they might be 12 or 13 or 14, but their brain really isn't quite representative, or their cognition isn't quite representative of their age. And often we put the great enormous tasks on people that you have to go to college or you have to go to work and you have to do all these things. That's what normal people do. But what we find is that the stress and anxiety associated with that actually complicates things for them, so that they can be sneaky about it and sabotage, and they go about their own way of getting out of that sort of stuff because they're a bit frightened or they're not sure how to do it, or they're distrusting of the process, or they might not be ready for that sort of change. They might not be able to do the things that we ask them to do. So not only do we need to create a safe place where they can unpack all this, we need to be realistic in our expectations about working with young people who experience this sort of stuff and where they're at. So maybe we need to be lower our expectations so that when we work with them, that when they don't get something or they struggle with something or they're stressed out, maybe it's about us managing rather than them managing. Maybe we need to look at our approaches and go, what would work best in this situation, rather than trying to get them to fit in a certain therapeutic model or a certain youth work practice or whatever the case may be. I know in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, there's certain things like accommodation, food, and all that sort of stuff needs to be met. But how can we do that effectively for these people? What sort of expectations can we have that's going to be okay to work with them, considering that they might not be fully ready to take on normal developmental sequencing? A researcher in Boston published a groundbreaking twin study in 2003. When she looked at twins who discordant for trauma, one twin had a history of significant trauma and the other didn't. She found that the twin who had the trauma history had, on average, an 8-point difference in IQ scores. The trauma was the only distinguishing variable in the lives of these twins. So as you can see, trauma is a significant risk factor for negative outcomes such as school failure, juvenile delinquency. Based on that, things in the way. Hang on, break it up. So based on that fact,